Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today, Masechtas Kiddushin Daf Mem Hey. We are going to begin on Mem Hey Amud Alf, about 8 lines from the top by the 2 dots. Itmar. So we learn as follows. Mace. Let's say Rashi says Zeshikitsha Sholodas Avia. We're talking about what we mentioned last time, that a person was Makadish a woman without the father's consent, and then he died. And the question was, there's any possibility that that's a Kiddushin. And now she falls to the brother for Yibum, because since he died, they didn't have children, so normally there's a din Yibum. But over here, because it was without the consent of the father, on this, Rav Huna says name of Rav, Mamenes la mamaro venu mamenes la zikasai. So this is going to need a little bit of explanation. She will do mian because of the mimer, says Rashi. Sricha mian im get hamutal oleha im osaba mimer oso haget matzricha yos ima mian. So we know that typically when a woman is married and it's not a kedusha deraisa without the father's consent, so then she can just do mian, she can walk out. Now over here, if let's say when it comes to her husband who died, so she needs to do mian with a get hamutala together with it, im asaba maimer. Also again masricha yos imu mian. So when it comes to the brother could have bia, and then technically, again, in a normal situation, they would be married through yibum. However, there's a din derabanan of mimer, and therefore, if instead the brother did mimer, then she would actually be required to do mian because of the mimer, and that would be a requirement. However, enu mamenes l'zikasai. However, says Rashi, lo asaba mimer. Let's say the brother did not do mimer; he didn't give her Kiddushin kesef, not in a typical Kiddushin of marrying a penuya, but his brother, who's deceased, let's say he didn't do anything, so in that case, we would just require him to do chalitza. So if that's the case, chalitza enu zukakta liyos mamenes im hachalitza. We don't require her to do mian together as well. So that's actually going to be explained on, but this is what the Gemara is going to say now. Ketzad. Asaba mimer. So what does it mean, mamenes mamar? It means that if the brother did mimer with her, so sricha get usricha chalitza sricha mian. Actually, it's not just the requirement of mian, but also he would have to give a get, he would have to do chalitza and mian. So why all these 3 things? So sricha get, why does the second brother have to give a get? Because shemen nisratza b'kedushi sheni. Because maybe the father actually just wants it to be a regular kedushin, not the first one, but the second one. So since she was never married to the first brother, okay, fine, it may not be yibum, but it's still a din kedushin, and therefore because of that, we require a get to remove that kedushin. Sricha chalitza shemisratza b'kedushi rishon. Maybe instead we require him to do chalitza because possibly the father actually wanted the first kedushin, and therefore, even though it was without his consent, maybe it was nitzrat sa'ab, the father wanted the first one, and therefore she really was married to the first guy, and therefore it's a real zika, and therefore require him to do chalitza as well to remove that zika. However, sricha mian, so then why do you need mian? You already gave a get and chalitza, what else do you need? So shemel nitzrat sa'ab lo b'kedusha rishon lo b'kedusha sheni. It's possible that really the father didn't want her to be married to the first guy who died, or the brother. So v'yomrim, people say in Kiddushin Tyson ba'chaisa, and this is what we mentioned before. What happens if, let's say, this guy goes and marries her sister? So people say, oh, it's nothing. It's not a Kiddushin because he did gave her a get, gave her chalitza. Obviously, it means that she was married to him, and therefore, if this man subsequently gives Kiddushin to her sister, people will say it's nothing, because you can't marry a sister while that sister is alive. So therefore, people would say it was nothing. But the truth is, what if the father didn't want the first marriage or the second marriage, and therefore she really is not married to either of them? And therefore that means subsequently, now that this son, this man, I should say, does Kiddushin with her sister, it really is a good Kiddushin. And therefore that's the reason why we do miyun, so it shows that maybe it was never a good marriage, and therefore the Kiddushin that he gave to her sister really is typhus, and therefore because of that he'll have to address that issue as well by giving her a get, etc. Okay. Let's look at question 3. How could you require all 3? This is what we just said. So if we're dealing with a katana and she was without her father's consent, umes, and that man dies, hamikadsha, the nafalifne achavit asa b'maimer, and then that man did maimer. So then all 3 is required. However, back in the Gemara, well, asa b'maimer, let's say the person that she was zokuk to possibly didn't do maimer, so all there was a zika, a possible zika, because again, that's only assuming that the father wanted the first marriage. We only require chalitza, that's it. So my amrit tiboy na miyan. So maybe we should also require miyun. So again, you don't need a get because he didn't do mimer. So therefore you don't need a get to remove the mimer. So, but he still needs to do chalitza. So chalitza shows that he's actually married on some level to her, and that's where he required chalitza. So but we also require miyun, like we said before, Shem Yomi and Kiddushin Taisa B'Chaisa. But the problem is the same thing, l'chayra. If people see that he did chalitza with her, they're going to say that if this man subsequently would be mekadesh this girl's sister, they're going to say it's nothing because, I saw them do chalitza. So it's achas chalitzasai. So therefore people would say the Kiddushin is not typhus, but it really could have been typhus. So you should require miyun. So hakol yoidim, everyone knows. Halavai. Hakol yoidim achas chalutza d'Rabbanan. Everyone knows that achas chalutza is d'Rabbanan. Says Rashi, she'afil im chalitza zu chalitza gemura. Even if, let's say, it was a legitimate chalitza, Kiddushin Taisin B'Chaisa. Interestingly enough, that man could technically, Me'ikar Hadin, give Kiddushin to her sister. She'achos chalutza eno sur el m'divri seifrim. So the second sister wouldn't simply go out without a get if he was Mekadesh her. And therefore, that's the reason why, if Maimer wasn't done, you don't need to do Miyan. So it's only, again, Ma'menes al-Mamaro, v'hin Ma'menes al-Zikasai. Okay. Fine. So that's the din. Everyone knows that achos chalutza d'Rabbanan. The Amrei Shlakish kan shana Rabbi. This is what Rabbi learned in Masechtas Yevamos. That he said the following: achos gerusha midaraisa. If, let's say, you divorced your wife, so it's an isser deraisa to marry her sister. However, achos chalutza midivri seifrim. It's only the Rabbanan. And since it's the Rabbanan, people are going to know you still have to give her a get. The sister. Okay. How to make tray? So now we have a story of 2 people. The Havi Koshasu Chamra Tuti Tzipi B'Bavel. And they were drinking some wine underneath these trees. Rashi says it's a minarava, some type of a willow tree of sorts. Shokol Chai Minayu Kosa de Chamra. So one took a cup of wine. Yoivel Chavri. And he gave it to his friend. Amr, he said, Mikachli Bartech Libri. Let's make a shidduch. Like, what are we doing over here? So why don't we allow your daughter marry my son? Right? And as Rashi says, Bidcha Livni, your daughter to my son. So Ravina Filman Diyamek Chayshin and Shemin Esratza Av, even according to the one who says Rashi, Tabash and Skashel Shodasavi, if the daughter does this without the father's consent, that Shemin Esratza Av, maybe the father does consent. So even that person that we're Chayish Shemin Esratza Av, as we continue to Mem Hey Beis, Shemin Esratza Haben Lo Amrinan. We can't say that about the son. The son, okay, fine, the daughter okay, because we're dealing with a katana, but the son is someone who has to be his consent, says Rashi. Da'av b'kedushi bitoi b'choldahu nichale de tava mesev tandu. I can understand that the girl and the father will be happy, let her marry her off. Of a gavra daik v'notzev. However, a man is going to be more particular. Uven enu b'rshus aviv l'kadish es isha shelo b'shluchusai. And a son, is not in the rishus of the father that he can be mekadosh his son off like that. So Amri lo Rabbanu Ravina v'dilma shliach shavi. So 1 second, how do you know? Maybe the son made the father into a shliach. L'chotzev inish l'shav le'avu shliach. A son wouldn't have the audacity and disrespect of making his son into a shliach. If a son wouldn't do that to his father. V'dilma arutze artzi kamei. Maybe the father knows his son wants to marry her, and the father steps up and makes himself a shliach for his son. So Malay Rabba Bar Shimi Befer Shemar. It's explicit. Doloi Sebel Derav Ushmuel. What is that? It says Rashi. Befer Shemati Mimenu Doloi Savule What Rav Shmuel of Chosheshin Shem Nisratza Av. The Koshkin L'Shem also Haben Shliach. So we don't hold to that. Okay. Who gavra? So that was the case. So we basically say this is not a possibility where the father gives money to another man and says, let's marry off our kids. Doesn't work. Who gavra to kanish bekisha diyarka? There was a man who was mekadosh woman. Rashi's aguda ukatana sholadas aviavi. Some type of a bundle of vegetables. They were small. It was without the father. She was a katana. And not that the vegetables were small, it means she was a katana, and it was without the father's consent. Beshukah was done also in the marketplace, which, as we saw before, is also not such a nice thing to do. So maybe the father will consent. That's only if the man marries his girl in a respectful way. If he's going to be disrespectful to my daughter, to marry her off in the marketplace, that much no father's going to agree to. We'll say, what exactly is this bezoying? Is it because he's giving her a bunch of vegetables? Or is it in the marketplace? Nafkamina, dekanish bekaspa, beshuka, he gave a nice amount of money, but was in the marketplace. Oh, bekisha diyarka bebesa, my. Or he did get these lousy vegetables, but it was in a house. It was in a respectful manner. The truth is, they're both wrong. Okay. Next Gemara. Hahudi Aimer Dekrivoy. So one person said, they're my relatives. Vihi Amra Lekriva. And she said, to my relatives. So basically, there was a dispute between the husband and wife, trying to figure out who their child should marry. Should they marry my relatives or your relatives? So Kafte, as one could imagine, she is the woman, the mother, forced her hand. Adi Amala, until he said to her, Tehavila Kriva. Okay, fine. Marry your family, your relatives. Ad Achli V'Shasi, while they're eating and drinking, Asa Krive Be'igru B'Kacha. His relatives came, they went to like an upper floor, basically there's not too many people around, and was Makadisher, Rashi's Baseser, hiddenly. V'Yadainu Kibul Ha'av Kiddushin, the father wasn't Makab Kiddushin, Mikarib Shel Ishtoi, because I guess he was in the proximity of his wife. So it's interesting. So the man said, okay, fine, I'll do whatever you say, my wife. And then as soon as her back is turned, he did what he wanted to do. So Rabbi Ksiv, the Pasuk says, Sheiris Yisrael Sa'avla, that the Klai Yisrael is not going to do something like that. We don't lie, says Rashi. We're not going to assume that the father actually would have consented to such a thing. He's not going to retract on his words. He told his wife one thing and that's it. He says a different reason, totally reason, that this guy is definitely not going to consent because he was already matriach to have his daughter, get married to her relatives, and he paid all this money for it. So he's not going to just cause that loss. So my benayah tarach. let's say there was no tircha, he didn't really spend any money for a suda. So in that situation, maybe a person would do this. There's no chazaka at least. Or we should say, no, there is a chazaka. There's this concept of sheri silos avla, that a yid is not going to act this way. Question 4. Who ratza lases bitoy l'kurayboy? He wanted his daughter to marry his relatives. She said her relatives. He ended up saying, okay, fine, your relatives. And then, all of a sudden, his relatives was Mekadesh. So we say, in that situation, what is the din? So it says like this. Im hu tarach basuda in chayshishin. If he was matriach, then certainly we're not chayshish this Kiddushin. But if he was not matriach, then it's a machlokus whether or not we would apply this concept of Shiris Yisrael Lasa Avlo. Okay. Okay, hold on for 1 second. Let's see if we have another question here. TA12. Let's just see a couple of these questions on Mem Hayamid Bays regarding Hahu Gav de Kaddish Bekisha de Yarka, the Rabbi the Kuliyama in Mekadeshus Kivan de Havi Derech Bazayan, Mahu Bazayan. So we end up saying both of them are as a Bazayan. Gam Kiddushin Bekisha, de Yarka Begam Shekidish Beshuka. So they are both actually Edi to Edi, as it says Derech Bazayan Hu, which is TA 12. Okay, and TB. Fine, we didn't see that yet. Let's continue. We'll see that at the end of the daf. All right. 2 dots. Niskachel das avia. So she was mekadesh with the father's consent. Sounds great. And then all of a sudden, the father travels to another country. And then the guy marries her. Now, we know that the Kiddushin was with his consent, but maybe the Nisuin should also be with the father's consent. So, we can assume, let's say that she was married to a Kohen, she's Kiddushin to a Kohen, that she could still eat Truma. We're going to assume that everything is fine unless the father comes and protests. No, what are you talking about? What if he does come protest? She'll end up eating Truma Mafreya, says Rashi. Now, even though it's true, we said that technically this whole Kiddushin shouldn't have been an issue because we know she doesn't eat Truma midrabanan, but Zu, in this case, Hoyel v'Kiddusheho Adaito, says Rashi, since it was with her father's consent, this Kiddushin, Hayu Chupa Nami Nichale, and Shinishma Shiava V'Yimcha. So we'll allow her to continue to eat until he protests. Okay, and on this the Gemara says, Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Havi Uvda v'Choshlei Rav l'Hod Ravasi. He was actually concerned about Ravasi's shita, and he said that she should not eat the truma. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Amoida Rav. However, Rav, who says that she could eat truma, will agree. She mesa, if let's say she dies, Eino Yorsha, that he will not inherit her. We'll put the money in the chazaka of the master, namely the father. Says Rashi, you actually had to be married. It's like a sharecropper. If she dies, he will not inherit her. We're going to assume that he's not going to be okay with it. Question 5. Again, it was with the father's consent. And the father went to the Medina Sayyam. So, my time of the Rav, the Echelos Betruma, Miyad, why would he allow her to eat Truma immediately? They feel Hachi in Bala Yorsha, but yet not when it comes to Yerusha. So he says like this: the Indian Truma, even the father did not want, Hari Arusa. Again, like technically, I didn't really read the Rashi properly. It's pumfakir. It's only then the Rabbanan that an Arusa cannot eat Truma. However, Midaraisa, she already could. It's only because of, possibly because of a Mekach Tais or of Simpun. Or she may give the Truma to her brothers and sisters, as the Gemara said out in the first parak. But Me'ikar din, she's allowed to eat the Truma. So therefore, we allow her to eat the Truma. However, when it comes to Yerusha, it's Pumfakert. Actually, it's She'ero. It's only when you're actually married. We don't know if the father was okay with this, so therefore we're going to put them on Necheskas Mari, which may be the same thing as TB 13. Let's see. Niskadsha Ladasavia Baholch Medinas Yamadi says, Maishna Libid around the Achelas Mashum Mishum Shnustam Nisratza Maida to Ena Yerusha Dishemel Nisratza. Exactly the same question. TB 13 is the same question as number 5. Okay, so in that case, let's continue. Niskadsha Das. So let's say she was married with the father's consent. V'ni says Sholodas, as we said, similar to the previous case. The Nisuin was without the father's consent. The Avia Khan, but the father has been around. He's here. Not that he said no, Rashi says Loho Diosoi. He wasn't aware of it. And he happens to be present. He's not in Medina Siyam. So Rav Huna Eno Chelas. So Rav Huna says that she cannot eat. Rav Yirmiyah Barabo Emer Chelas. So Rav Huna Emer Eno Chelas, why not? V'afilo Rav Di Emer Chelas. Even in the case above, when he went to the Medina Siyam, the father, that he did allow to eat. Hasam Hudul Isil Av. That's because the father wasn't around, so we can just assume that, okay, he probably was okay. He was okay with the Erisons. He's probably okay with the Nisuin. Why wouldn't he? However, over here, the father's here. So, Haidi Ishtik Mirtach Rasach. Maybe the fact that he's silent, his silence shows his anger. And really, he's not consenting to this. Rabbi Yirmiyah Barabo Eimer, no, Chelas. Actually, you can look at it the other way around. She could eat Truma. When he said, when it comes to the father who went to Medina Siyam, that she cannot eat, because the father could always, maybe later on, come back and protest. He's not here now, but if he does come, he may protest and be problematic. He's here. So Medishasik, the fact that he's silent and he's here, must be isnuchi isnachale. So it's interesting, it's literally the opposite way of looking at it. The fact that he's here, why isn't he speaking up? Either he's angry, he doesn't want to speak, he's giving like the silent treatment, he's like stonewalling them. Or you can say, no, the fact that he's here and doesn't say anything, it's like shtika kodah. Okay. Now we have a fascinating case. Niskadsha sholodasavia. Venisa sholodasavia. Here you have and Khan. The Avia Khan, the father's here. And the Kiddushin was out without the father's consent, and then the Nisuin was out the father's consent. So here it should be a double pashut that she should not be able to eat the truma. Over here, Rav Huna Eimer Chelos, Rav Yirmiyah Barabo Eimer Eno Chelos. The amazing thing is, Rav Huna in this case says she can eat. The case above, Rav Huna says Eno Chelos. Even though it was with the father's consent, at least the Kiddushin was with the father's consent, nonetheless Rav Huna still said, no. We cannot allow her to eat truma. But at least there was the father's consent for the Kiddushin. Over here, there was no consent at all. And this is why the Gemara says as follows, very strong language. Omer Ula is to understand, Hada Rav Huna. This statement of Rav Huna, this almost stira of Rav Huna, is kechemetz l'shinayim k'oshen le'nayim. It's like vinegar in my teeth. It's like burning my eyes with smoke. Doesn't make any sense. Hashta. Now, let's think this. Ma'ahasam Kiddushin Deraisa, when it came to Kiddushin Deraisa. And then he was maskim, he agreed, and therefore it's 100%. They're definitely married to Kiddushin Deraisa. Amrit Lo Achla, he still said, you can't eat because, again, he may come back, whatever. He may be angry. So Hachal Koshkan, here he didn't consent at all. So why would you say she could eat Truma in this case? As we continue to Mem Baba Manaf. Nirin Divri Talmud. So he says, the statement of the student is apparent. Says Rashi, Ula kamasayim l'milsa v'yelzav near Rav Yirmiyah, shehu talmidu shel Rav Huna. Rav Yirmiyah seems logical, which is he argues with Rav Huna. Rashi says, and that's the student of Rav Huna. So Rav Huna and Rav Yirmiyah argue, which is interesting that Rav Yirmiyah is actually the student of Rav Huna. He still argues. But it sounds like the student is right? The student outperformed the teacher here. Rabbi, my time with Rav Huna. So what is the logic of Rav Huna? Because it was a maisi assignment in the father's lifetime. What does that mean? Says Rashi. while the father's alive, he's here, right? She did everything without his consent. So it's ki'ilu he yisayim. It's almost like she's like an orphan. It's almost like the father's not even in the picture. V'hu ro'ah v'shasek, he's quiet. So o hifker zchus sheish lo ba. Maybe he just said, you know what? I know I have a schus to marry off my daughter. I'm mafkir. I'm not interested, and she can take care of herself. O shtikaso hoida. Again, the fact that he was silent by all these things, maybe that's enough. The bishlam in the skachul adaito when he says shul adaito equal member b'chadash shtika mirsas rasach. Why? Because we see he changed. Why he consented to this but not to that. So maybe the fact is he's angry. Of a kuli haylo shosik. This much a person is not going to be silent. He's not going to just completely remain quiet straight through that. Okay. Okay, let's stop here. Adkan.